The number you're working toward isn't yours. It never was. You built it by watching other people, and then you called it a goal. That's not an insult. It's a description of something that happens to almost every high earner who can't figure out why the progress never feels like progress. The income goes up, the stress stays. The milestone gets hit, the feeling doesn't arrive. And at some point, you stop asking why and just assume you're not far enough yet. You are. That's not the problem. The problem is what you're measuring against and where that measurement came from, and the fact that nobody, not once in all your financial planning and goal setting and budgeting, told you to question it. Let me say something plainly before we go further. You are not undisciplined. You are not financially irresponsible. You are not someone who needs a budgeting app or a 30-day spending freeze or a motivational video about delayed gratification. You've done the work. You've made real trade-offs. You thought more carefully about money than most people ever will. And it still doesn't feel like enough. That gap between what you've done and how you feel about where you are, that gap is real, and it's worth taking seriously. This is the part most people skip, because the standard financial conversation goes straight to behavior. Track more, save more, invest more, earn more, as if the problem is always a doing problem. Sometimes the problem is a perception problem, and a perception problem doesn't respond to better behavior. It responds to understanding where the perception came from. So let's do that. That's what we're doing today.
You are surrounded by people your brain has decided are your financial reference point. Not because you chose them consciously, because proximity chose them for you. Colleagues, former classmates, neighbors, people in your industry, people whose lives reach you in fragments, through conversations, through feeds, through things they mention without thinking and things you notice without meaning to. Your brain takes those fragments and does something with them, automatically, without checking with you first. It assembles a picture of what financial life looks like for someone at your level, your income, your age, your career stage, and it uses that picture to measure you. And this is where it goes wrong. Every time someone in your reference group does something, buys something, mentions something, hits something, your brain updates the picture. It recalibrates what normal looks like. And whatever you had before that update now sits slightly lower on the scale than it did 20 minutes ago. Not because you lost anything, because the benchmark moved. Your income went up, your reference group went up faster. And here is what nobody says clearly enough. You are not chasing wealth. You are chasing position. Wealth is a number. Position is a feeling. And position is defined entirely by who you're standing next to, which means it has no fixed value and no reachable endpoint. You cannot earn your way to a stable sense of position. The benchmark doesn't stop moving just because you catch up to it.
Here's the loop. Watch it carefully because you're going to recognize it. It starts with an observation. Someone in your world does something financially visible. Maybe they tell you directly. More often you infer it. A comment, a purchase, a tone of voice when they talk about money. Something in a photo that gives you a data point you didn't ask for. The observation feels neutral. It feels like just noticing. It isn't. Noticing is comparing. Most of what you call financial goals are comparisons in disguise. The number you're working toward, ask yourself honestly where it came from. Because if it shifted the last time someone around you hit a milestone, that is not a goal. That is a response. And you have been treating a response like a destination. After the observation comes recalibration. And this is the part your brain does without asking permission. Your brain doesn't evaluate whether the comparison is fair. It doesn't factor in that you don't have the full picture of that person's financial life. It doesn't check whether the reference point is even relevant to your actual situation. It just updates the standard, immediately, quietly. And the map of where you are relative to where you should be shifts without you noticing the shift. What felt like solid progress this morning now feels like adequacy. What felt like adequacy last month now sits in the deficit column. Nothing moved in your actual financial life. The benchmark moved, and you're living inside the consequences of that movement as if it reflects reality. But that's not the real issue. The real issue is what the loop produces, because the behavioral output of a constantly recalibrated deficit isn't always what people expect. Sometimes it's spending, rationalized as quality, as investment, as something you've earned. That version gets talked about a lot. The version that doesn't get talked about is paralysis, a kind of quiet overwhelm where the gap between where you are and where the benchmark now says you should be feels too structural to address through normal effort. So you stop. Not dramatically, just subtly. The aggressive saving slows. The investment timeline gets pushed. The financial momentum you had quietly dissipates because it was tied to a sense of possibility that the comparison just eroded. The loop closes. The next observation arrives, and it starts again. This channel exists to name patterns like this one, not to solve them in a video, to make them visible, because you cannot interrupt something you can't see.
Here's the part nobody admits. You don't actually want more money. You want to stop feeling smaller than the people around you, and those are not the same goal. One of those responds to income, the other one laughs at income. You have been disciplined, you have been consistent, you have been working hard at the wrong problem for years. And the most uncomfortable part? You already knew it wasn't working.
Think about the last time your income went up. There was a window, days, maybe a couple of weeks, where the increase felt real, where something like forward momentum was present. And then it leveled, and the ambient pressure returned, and you went back to carrying the same low-grade weight you had before the raise, except now the number was higher, and the justification for the weight was thinner. What happened in that window is the loop closing. Higher income moved you into proximity with higher income people. Higher income people recalibrated your reference group. The recalibrated reference group moved the benchmark, and the benchmark absorbed the raise before you had time to feel it. This is not a willpower problem. This is a structural problem. Think about a major financial decision from the last few years. A home, a neighborhood, a car, a school. Walk back through how it actually formed. How much of it was yours, meaning rooted in your actual needs, your actual financial position, your actual priorities, and how much of it was shaped by a quiet background check your brain was running? Is this what someone at my level does? Because that background check is always running. Every significant financial decision passes through it, and the answer it looks for is not found in a spreadsheet, it's found in the reference group. The result is that your spending scales with your social environment, not with your financial progress. You start spending at the level of the people you're near, whether or not your actual foundation supports it, and you call that normal, because for your reference group it is normal. But normal for your reference group and financially healthy for you are not the same thing, and you've been treating them as if they are. And this is where most people get it completely wrong. They think the fix is discipline, more restraint, better decisions. But you can be perfectly disciplined inside a broken frame and still end up exactly where you are now. The frame is the problem, not the behavior inside it. Here is a harder one. Notice what you don't say about money.
specifically what you don't say to the people closest to you. Let's be honest for a second. Part of the reason you stay quiet about financial stress is not just social discomfort, it's something more specific. It's that admitting you feel financially stressed at your income level sounds, even to you, like incompetence, like you should have this sorted by now, like the income was supposed to mean something, and the fact that it doesn't mean what you expected is a failure you'd rather carry alone than name out loud. And that silence is exactly what keeps the loop running. No reality check comes in. No honest conversation reveals that most people at your income level are carrying the same weight. You just hold the benchmark in isolation, and isolated, it only ever grows. And then there's the thing that happens to your wins. A bonus, a debt cleared, a savings account that crosses a line you set for yourself. For a moment, it lands as real. And then something enters, a comment, an awareness, a fragment from the reference group, and the win contracts. The scale expanded, the milestone shrinks inside it. You didn't lose progress, you lost your ability to recognize it. That's not carelessness, that's the mechanism doing exactly what it was designed to.
The long-term cost of this pattern is not a single financial catastrophe. It doesn't arrive that way. It accumulates. The first cost is the one that touches everything else. You never actually get to feel financially ahead. Not because you aren't, because the benchmark keeps redefining what ahead means. People who've carried this for 10 or 15 years describe a strange experience. They look back at earlier versions of themselves, earning less, owning less, objectively less stable, and feel something like envy for the clarity those earlier versions had, before the reference group expanded, before the benchmark got complicated, when enough had a simpler definition. They were okay then, they just didn't know it, because the reference group changed and told them they weren't. Stop. Think about how long you've been doing that. The second cost runs deeper, because a comparison-driven deficit doesn't just shape how you feel, it shapes where money actually goes, not through reckless decisions, through a long accumulation of individually defensible ones, each one reasonable on its own, each one quietly calibrated against the reference group, each one pointed slightly away from building durable financial independence and slightly toward maintaining a position in a competition you never consciously agreed to enter. A decade of that is a decade of real income flowing in a direction determined more by who you've been watching than by what you actually want. And the regret that follows isn't sharp. There's no single decision to point at. It's the slower, quieter realization that the path was shaped by a benchmark, and the benchmark was always someone else's. Here is the question. Take the time with it. If you removed from memory every piece of financial information you've ever absorbed about other people, every salary, every home, every number mentioned, every purchase you registered without meaning to, would your sense of your own financial position change? Not the position, the sense of it. How much of what you believe about where you stand is actually yours? These aren't questions, they're descriptions. See which ones fit. When something financially positive happens, your first instinct is to locate it, to figure out where it sits relative to what someone in your world is doing, not as competition, just as context. It happens before you decide to do it. You have a detailed, assembled sense of what people in your professional and social world are doing financially. Nobody gave it to you directly. You built it from fragments, and it functions as a permanent background benchmark against which your own position is continuously measured.
You have felt real progress, genuine forward movement, and then had it compressed by a single external data point, something someone said, something you saw. And the progress became smaller without anything in your actual financial life changing. When you try to describe what financial security would feel like, you can't fully separate the internal experience from some sense of how it would place you relative to others. The two are tangled in a way that's difficult to undo. You don't feel behind because you are behind. You feel behind because your benchmark is a moving target built from other people's highlights. Stop. Think about that. You have a number, a savings figure, a net worth, an income threshold, and when you look at it honestly, you realize it isn't entirely yours. It lives somewhere above where the most financially visible people in your current world appear to be. And you know, on some level, that by the time you reach it, they'll have moved.
Here is what actually changes when you can see this from outside it. The comparison loop runs automatically only when it's invisible. The moment you can observe it happening, catch the data point entering, watch the benchmark move, see the gap manufactured in real time, it loses its automation. Not its existence, its automation. And in that gap between trigger and response, something else than the default behavior becomes possible. This is the part most people never reach, not because they aren't smart enough, because nobody named it clearly enough for them to look for it. There is also a simpler thing to hold on to. The benchmark was never real. You were comparing your complete internal experience, every anxiety, every uncertainty, every gap between income and reality that you're fully aware of, against other people's external presentation, which is a selection, a highlight, a surface. You don't see the debt behind the house. You don't see the 2 a.m. calculation. You don't see the gap between how things look and how they actually sit. You see the fragment. Your brain treats it as the full picture and then uses that picture to tell you that you're behind. The gap you've been trying to close doesn't exist. You constructed it from other people's surfaces. Seeing that doesn't fix anything overnight, but it changes the question you're asking. And a better question is worth more than most financial plans. Most people who carry this pattern reach the number eventually, the one that was supposed to mean arrival, and some of them reach it faster than they planned. And on the other side of it, something is already waiting, a new benchmark, a recalibrated reference group, a sense of normal that moved while they were working toward the finish line. The arrival they expected isn't there, not because they failed, because arrival was never the actual goal, position was. And position doesn't have a finish line because it's not measured against anything stable. It's measured against people, and people keep moving. You can spend another decade chasing it. You'll earn more. You'll accumulate more. You'll hit numbers that would have seemed unreachable 10 years ago. And the morning after, you'll check the benchmark. That's the part that doesn't change on its own. Even if you catch up, you don't escape it. The reference group moves, the benchmark resets, the feeling you were expecting gets rescheduled. That's not a temporary problem, that's the structure. If something in this video landed, sit with it before you do anything else with it. Not to fix it, just to see it clearly. That's where it starts.